Hey, Nick, welcome to the show. As a way of getting started, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, thanks so much. It's great to be with you. I'm a communications coach, and we work with professional speakers and executives to help them tell their stories more effectively.
How'd you get interested in this?
It goes back a long way, really. I was 17, and I was tobogganing,
Yeah.
and I crashed into a tree, fractured my skull, and I was
Ooh.
in a coma for a week. And out of that, I survived. I actually technically died for 15 minutes. So I'm one of these miracles that doctors like to talk about, especially my neurosurgeon. I
Yeah.
would not be alive today if it weren't for him. But when I came back, I couldn't do that which all of your listeners can do automatically, which is read unconsciously the body language of the people they know well. That was just gone. And so I had to retrain myself to understand body language. And when we talk about body language, we don't really care. We humans don't care about the body language per se. What we care about is the intent behind the body language. So this is that thing that we all do automatically when somebody we know comes in the room and we go, oh, you're pissed off. Why are you pissed off? Or you look really happy. What happened? Good news? What was it? Share.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. I couldn't immediately get that kind of information. So I had to retrain myself. It took about a year, but I've been fascinated by communications and body language ever since.
And how did that manifest? Did somebody just tell you, hey, Nick, you're not getting it? Or did you notice it yourself? Or
Yeah, I noticed it myself because I went back to school. I was in high school. I went
yeah.
back to school and I had a terrific scar down the side of my head.
Ooh.
I was wearing a bandage. I was pale. And my friends, remember these are 17-year-olds, looked at me and said, Nick, you look great. And I didn't pick up on the sarcasm. Now, at age 17, virtually everything you
It's
say is
sarcasm.
sarcastic. So
Especially in New England. Yeah.
yeah, right. I was in deep trouble. I was getting nothing. And I said, oh, thanks. And they said, no, we're kidding. You look terrible. What's up? Because they were such sensitive friends. And so then I learned very quickly that I wasn't getting what was going on. And that was just deeply puzzling for me at the time.
Well, it's kind of strange in that you had that type of injury, yet it didn't impact your scholastics at all. I mean, you went on to great schools, advanced degrees.
Well, don't tell the admissions officers, but there was probably about 6 months there where I coasted. I was not myself. But I'm very lucky. I recovered. The brain is plastic, especially when you're young, and I was able to pull it together and move on. But it was an interesting 6 months, and really took a year to be fully recovered.
And how'd you go about learning that? Was it through books, courses?
No, I just stared at my friends until I made them uncomfortable, just trying to figure out, matching the behavior with the intent. And I asked them a lot of really irritating questions. So it was a very granular, in the moment kind of relearning.
And that's kind of counterintuitive now that you're kind of a speech expert, where that I view as a listening expertise.
Well, I say, and I puzzle people all the time when I say this, but I say one of the important skills of a speaker is to be able to listen.
Yeah.
And great speakers will tell you that when they're talking, there's about 10% of their brain that the entire time is focused on that audience, just to see how the audience is receiving it and making mid-course adjustments as needed. If you're one of those people that's really nervous, and so you get this kind of adrenaline rush that just takes you through like an express train, and afterwards you go, I don't remember anything I said. What did I say? Then that's the kind of person who doesn't notice the audience because the nerves are getting in the way of listening. And so being able to set aside that 10% is really important. Listening is a vital skill.
And so this developed, because your degree's in English, right? Which, kind of a passion about communication, obviously.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then you went all the way through a PhD program, and then you went to corporate America, or is that?
Almost. So I got a PhD in literature and rhetoric. I studied the ancient Greeks and Romans. So,
So interesting.
yeah, fascinating. Talk about a useful degree. But then, surprisingly enough, it did turn out to be useful because I got a call from the State Secretary of Education. I was in Virginia, and I had known him through the University of Virginia. And he said that the speechwriter has had a nervous breakdown, the governor's speechwriter. Would you like to replace him on short notice? We need somebody who knows rhetoric and can write. And I should have asked, why did he have a nervous breakdown? That would have been the sensible question to ask. But instead, I said, sure, because it sounded exciting and fun and different. I had been teaching Shakespeare and rhetoric at the University of Virginia, and I was set to be a happy little academic for the rest of my days. But this sounded more exciting, so I jumped on it. And I found that the reason the speechwriter had a nervous breakdown was from overwork.
Oh.
I wrote an average of 5 speeches a day, 7 days a week for the remaining 2 years of the governor's term. And now many of those speeches were short. They were just what we called grip and grins in those days, where he was just greeting some dignitaries or opening up a car dealership or something like that. But they required research and they were real speeches. So it was an exhausting but fascinating and fun 2 years.
Now, when you're coaching professionals, kind of in the business world, what about that turned you on? Was it the challenge? Was it that you had a lot to work with?
It's finding out people's stories, helping them find their voices. I find that completely fascinating. I briefly made an attempt to become an actor. And so that's what an actor does is, of course, you have a character who's predetermined, is written by somebody, and your job is to bring that character to life. And I found it, I had a mortgage and 2 kids, and I just found the real world intervened. I couldn't make a living, so I did other things. But that aspect of finding out another person's voice or character and bringing it to life, helping them bring it to life in this case, just has never stopped fascinating me. It's just a really interesting process. And most of us are afraid, or we hold ourselves back, or we think other people are judging us. There's all kinds of reasons why we don't inhabit our full voice. But when you see somebody or meet somebody who is fully themselves, that's a great experience. They really light up a room. And so I love to help people do that.
And that's it, because in the business world, we're meeting strangers all the time. And I'm fascinated by the neuroscience behind that, because that is probably the number one challenge I see in my marketplace is how do you approach a stranger and start a conversation?
Yeah, absolutely. It's the first question. The neuroscience tells us the first question that we ask whenever we meet a stranger is this person friend or foe? And so at a very basic level, we're sizing them up. Do we open up to them? Do we trust them? Do we get comfortable with them? Or does something set us off and make us resist? And it can go either way. It doesn't take much to push people in one direction or the other. So learning the neuroscience and working on the body language for me is a really essential skill for anybody in sales or anybody in business in general who meets people all the time.
That's it. And what I see is people doing the exact wrong thing, because I think they're thinking at the wrong abstraction layer. They're thinking at the kind of human to human versus what I call mammal to mammal.
Yes, I like that. Yeah.
Right. And that's the neuroscience is the mammal, exactly what you said, is this person, how do I know this person if I know them? If I don't know them, what do they want? They want my time or my money, which is the same thing. And how do I get rid of them?
Yeah, absolutely. Especially now, we're so over scheduled and information overloaded. We're always looking for reasons to push somebody off or not take the meeting or don't pick up the phone or whatever it is. Don't even open the email.
That's it. And I think too many people try and stay at that human level of building up interest when the other person is defending, because I don't know you. And if I don't know you, I don't believe anything you say. Right. Because you're trying to trick me.
Yeah, I say there are really 4 steps to making a connection like that. The first step is you have to be open. If you're not open, then nothing else is going to happen, right? If you're closed off, and so that's what you're referring to, is our tendency to be closed off just to save time and save risk. So the first step is to be open, and you can train yourself to be open in key areas of what your face is doing, what your body language is doing. And then the next step is to connect in some way. If you can't connect, then if you can't find some reason to connect with the other person, then when you try to reveal what you're interested in later on, you'll be like one of those crazy people on the street who comes up to you in New York City and says, "The end of the world is coming. The end of the world is coming." What's your reaction, right? You
You're
just,
running the other way.
yeah, you go
Yeah.
the other way. And any kind of attempt to share your passion or interest, or try to sell somebody, or even just inform them about your business, will be met with that kind of resistance if you haven't first been open and then established that connection.
Uh, That's it. And I think what's happening today is, you're right, everyone's bombarded by this and everyone's forgetting that that other person's in that state of mind.
Yeah, yeah, we all think our stories are more interesting than they are.
Yeah, that sense it's my job to call you, it's your job to talk to me.
Right,
When,
right.
no, you have your own life, your own priorities and things.
Yeah.
How do you get that rapport going? What is the easiest way to do it when it's stranger to stranger?
Well, it's a truism that most people have heard this, to say you need to do more listening than talking. But in terms of the body language, we can actually get quite specific about what helps you connect. Showing openness, and it shows up first of all in the face. Not surprisingly, we as infants, we humans learn to connect and look at other people's faces to see whether there's welcome there or whether there's danger. And so there are 4 positive facial gestures and 4 negative ones, and you need to kind of inspect your own face. If you're one of those people that's ever had the experience of somebody coming up to you and saying, "What's the matter?" and you said, "Nothing. That's just my resting face," then you need to check that out.
Too much Botox, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Or that kind of habitual frown.
Right. Just somebody who happens to not have a welcoming face.
Yeah, exactly. So the 4 signs, just quickly, are open eyes, raised eyebrows, a smile, and a nod. And they're very simple. They're obvious. We know them all intuitively,
Yeah.
because we don't think about them consciously. And so you can check yourself out to see if you use those 4 gestures habitually when you meet somebody. You don't need to do all 4 at once. You use them in sequence. Use them naturally. You're not trying to suddenly light
Right.
up like a Christmas tree. But the idea is to just to be aware of the extent to which you're doing those things, or the opposite: frowning, shaking your head no, lowering your eyebrows in suspicion.
Yeah, and that's it. And I think people who have to contact strangers all day long kind of get burnt out and grind it down to the point where they're not proactively taking, getting their body language, sitting up straight. Like I seen your videos where you open the arms, and that, leads your brain to think openly,
Yeah,
right?
and it actually is funny. I did a series of experiments with some students at the Kennedy School at Harvard when I was a visiting fellow there, that I had them do introductions, just simply introduce themselves for a minute. That was the instruction: stand up, introduce yourself for a minute. And so these are mid-career people who are quite accomplished, and they're not undergraduates, right? These are older people who have done things. Some of them are involved in governments around the world. Some of them, in this case, the one I'm thinking of, this gentleman had been a soldier in Iraq and had come back to start a foundation to help children around the world. Brilliant, wonderful guy. But he stood up, and in 60 seconds, he said virtually nothing about himself. It was closed. It was just the facts. Um, I served in Iraq for this number of years and this number of deployments. Present himself. But then I gave him the instruction. I just whispered in his ear. I said, "Okay, now give exactly the same introduction, only this time I want you to open your arms out about here."
Yeah.
And that sounded odd to him, but he'd been to Iraq. How hard could this be? He was a soldier, so he could do it. So he went out and uh, with the instruction of giving the same presentation, the same 60 seconds. He talked for 7 minutes about everything he'd experienced in Iraq and how that moved him to come back and save the children of the world. And by the end of that, there wasn't a dry eye in the house, and the experience was completely different. And I asked the audience, so what did you see? And they said, well, a different human being showed up. It was amazing. And I asked the guy who introduced himself, said, so what was that like for you? And he wasn't even aware that he'd talked for an extra 6 minutes. And the difference was, when you open up your arms like that, you're telling your own
body, the
telling
physiology.
your body, yeah, that you are open. And so he felt more comfortable, and he was willing to share. And of course, that made a much more powerful connection with the audience, who just loved him that second time around.
And it is just a collection of very simple changes that can dramatically improve someone's speaking skills. And it is kind of natural to be terrified of public speaking or even talking to strangers, because the mammal of us, we stay within our own tribe. You'll see this at conferences, right? Everyone sticks together. They call it cliques in high school. And it really doesn't change. Even as adults, we go to parties. We go to the people we know. We don't go to strangers first. And then we wait for an introduction, because now we know that person through another person. And now we're all part of the same tribe. It's kind of like this cellular multiplication or something.
Right. One of the best instances I ever saw that, I wasn't there personally, I saw it on video, but was actually going back a few years. And you raised the issue of tribes. It's a fascinating one to me. So this was Barbara Bush, when she was the first lady. And she had been criticized for being aloof and a woman of privilege and not being able to connect. And so her staff, I'm sure it was, set up this series of meetings with inner city kids in schools that were underfunded and suffering and whatnot. And the question sort of naturally arose, like, how is Mrs. Bush going to connect with these 6-year-olds who walk to school and are afraid of getting shot? I mean, just the difference seemed fundamental. And she did 2 things which were absolutely brilliant. Again, I don't know whether she was coached or not, but she did 2 things that were amazing. First of all, she crouched down so that she was eye level with them. And anybody who knows how to deal with kids knows that that's the first thing you do, right? But she did it, to give her full credit. And then she said, tell me what you hope for. Tell me your dreams.
Yeah.
And when we say, I'm not part of this tribe, or I don't look like you, or whatever, we all have dreams. We all have hopes. And as soon as we start to connect on that level, we realize, yeah, in some way we are part of the same tribe. And so it was a brilliant move, but it was a reminder that we can always connect with people.
And with a powerful, open-ended question that was completely about them.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. It wasn't like, what do you like about President Bush? It was like, no, what's your hopes and dreams? And what little kid doesn't have a half hour of ammo on that question?
Yeah, exactly. And how many speakers, let's put it back on your audience. How many speakers stand up and say, let me begin by telling you a little bit about myself?
Yeah.
That's from my standpoint, that's a deal killer. But that's the way, still, even in this day and age, 75% of talks begin because people think, I've got to introduce myself. Yeah. No, you don't. First, you've got to engage with the audience, find some common ground, tell them a story, do something that connects with them or gives them something interesting. And then after you've done that, after you've connected with them, then you can tell them about yourself, because then they'll care. But don't start with that. They don't care. Right. I always say it's like a James Bond movie. How does a James Bond movie begin? And when I lead people through this exercise, annoying them because they often get
not
wrong.
Fans.
Yeah, right. I'll say, okay, here's what happens. It begins with mayhem. It begins with a chase scene, explosions, whatnot. They hook you. And then 7 minutes, 3 minutes into the movie, they run the credits. Now, we can all agree that James Bond movie credits are stupid. They're
who cares?
Sort of gauzy, and there's a dumb song and sort of women flailing around and men shooting guns and things. It's really stupid and formulaic. But we don't care at that point because we've been hooked by the chase scene, by the explosions, by whatever's going on. Now, the same way with audiences and people. You got to hook me first, connect with me first, then tell me who you are.
Right. Yeah. And go figure, if I'm there to listen to you, I might already know a little bit about you. So,
Right.
so
Right. Exactly.
it's like they're probably thinking it's a ramp, but it's like a boring ramp.
Yeah.
Gets us some meat. Now, you recently wrote a book that has to do with what we're dealing with today, and that we're not meeting as many people face to face as we used to. We're coming through the good old internet all the time, or even worse, through apps. What made you write the book about that?
Well, I go around talking about body language to people around the world, and a few years back, I started noticing I was getting the same question, and usually the first question every single time, and it was, Nick, thanks for this. The body language is really interesting. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. But really, my problem is this. I work with a virtual team. I never see these people face to face. We might connect every week on an audio conference. A small percentage of people use video conferencing, but most people, it's
Just
email,
audio. Yeah.
overwhelmingly email and audio. And they say, how do I, if body language is as important as you say, how do I connect with these people? How do I send that kind of body language information across virtual channels? And my first reaction was to say, well, duh, you can't. And then I thought, we got to give them better information than that. So I started the research on the book, and I found something that will really shock your audiences. And I know this because it's shocked the folks I've spoken to about this. I'll say to them, so how many of you have 6 or more people reporting to you? And typically half the audience raises its hand. And I'll say, great. Now, how many of you have sent to one of your employees at some point a 2-word email, something along the lines of great job, nice job, fantastic job? Everybody raises their hands. Everybody who has somebody reporting to them has sent that email. And I said, would it interest you to know that 60% of the time that employee is likely to receive that email as if it was sarcastic, thereby going into paroxysms of nihilism and despair for an hour or more, thinking that their boss doesn't love them anymore? And there is usually an audible gasp from the audience when I tell them that. People are astounded to learn that odds on, more likely, the person is going to receive that badly than not. Why is that? That's because in the virtual world, the body language stuff we've been talking about, that human intent that we care about, is stripped out. It doesn't come through in the email.
Yeah.
It doesn't come through even in the audio conference, because emotion isn't carried through the kinds of audio conference, the sounds that audio conferences convey. It doesn't even come through as well in video conferences. It's probably a topic for another day. But the issue is all that human emotion that we take for granted that we get face to face is stripped out. And so we have to learn how to put that back in. And so the quick example, if you're going to send that 2-word email, nice job, add a smiley face to it. And I talk about that because then it's unambiguous. I ask, and I talk about that with audiences, and they go, depending on how old you are, if you're over 45 or so, you go, smiley faces,
What's that?
emojis, that's childish stuff. That's for the millennials. I'll say, get over yourself. It's time to start using them, because you're using this crude method of communication. Virtual communication methods are crude. That's just, they don't convey much information.
Yeah.
They do, but they don't. And so you've got to put back in that which has been stripped out. And emojis are one simple way to do that.
And that's it, because we do have confirmation bias. So if we are a sensitive person, or the assumption is that it might be sarcasm versus compliment,
Yeah.
we're going to think that. And, I live on social media pretty much all day. And I found, like, if I post a statement on one of my videos, people will comment on the statement without watching the video. They'll think they know what I'm going to say.
Right.
Versus when I put a question like, do you think this is the reason for, and then question, some issue, question mark question, they'll watch the video. And almost nobody will make a comment unless they'll comment on my use of capitalization versus something else, or what I'm wearing, or the weather that day, or whatever, something around them. What will people get out of the book?
Well, they'll learn a ton of simple strategies for removing that kind of ambiguity and negativity that automatically comes in the virtual world. Again, whether it's text-based communication or audio communication or even video. In the book, I give literally hundreds of simple little strategies, easy things to do that will make that better and remove the ambiguity. You have to understand every single virtual communication and therefore virtual relationship grades over time.
Yes.
If you're on an audio conference, this is very typical. People who have a relationship with a team that's spread out all over the world and they have a weekly audio conference, I'll say that relationship is going to get worse over time because of all the little silences, the time when somebody was on mute and they hit the unmute button and they were a little late in replying and you thought, what's the matter with that guy? Doesn't he care about this anymore? You know, it's those tiny little misunderstandings gradually accumulate over time in the virtual world. Face to face, we can see immediately. We see the warmth of the smile. We say, oh yeah, that person and I are still connected. But in the virtual world, it doesn't happen. So it all degrades over time. You have to take little steps. You have to be proactive in the virtual world to put the positive emotions back in.
Cool. Hey, this has been a great conversation. Where can people connect with you, get the book, and learn about your company?
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's publicwords with a D.com is the simplest place to go, and the information's on there. And I've been blogging since 2007, so there's I hate
Catching
to
up to
say
do.
it, there's tons of free resources on the website as well.